I don't know if it's entirely proper to do so, but I've always seen the Final Fantasy series as divided into eras. These eras are mostly defined by how they neatly slot into console generations. Maybe it gets a little murky towards the end, but for the majority of the mainline series, I think it works. But these eras can be seen for how the series grows and evolves. You can look at the SNES era of Final Fantasy and see a series that has fully hit its stride as one of the best, only being outdone by an era that launched them into cultural immortality, arguably being the zenith of the series because the stars likely will never align this way again. With this lens, the NES era could be seen as Final Fantasy finding its identity. The series was already a runaway smash success, but over the course of these first 3 games, Final Fantasy was able to figure out what would become the foundational elements that the rest of the game are built off of. It may sound backhanded to say it took 3 full high-selling games for Final Fantasy to find itself, but maybe look at it the other way. Experimentation is one of the most vital aspects to Final Fantasy. As opposed to their JRPG lineage brother, Dragon Quest, which is rooted in tradition as part of its identity, every Final Fantasy game takes wild swings with the property and filters out what does or doesn't work. So with that, we look at the last Final Fantasy game made before the series began its worldwide domination. As only a handful of months before Final Fantasy I arrived stateside, Square rounded out their first era with Final Fantasy III. As discussed in the last episode, Akitoshi Kawazu was no longer assigned to the Final Fantasy team as his Game Boy Saga series was selling like hotcakes. With Kawazu gone and no one wishing to attempt walking in the path Final Fantasy II carved out, Final Fantasy III made some changes. Now, it's worth impressing real quick that FF3 didn't revert back to a more FF1 style because FF2 underperformed. I've seen this idea bandied about before, and I think it's a very Western narrative because of how negatively we view Final Fantasy II, and also because it's completely fucking wrong. From the research I was able to find, Final Fantasy II outsold its predecessor 800,000 units to 600,000 units, proving to be a bigger success than the original. Sales doesn't equate to critical accolades, but unless anyone in my viewer base is a Japanese person who was around these games in the late 80s, don't all raise your hand at once! I'm not really sure how to get a bead on how Japanese players felt about the game, but the fact that Final Fantasy III sold 1.4 million units tells me it couldn't have been that bad. Back to Final Fantasy III, we'll kind of detail those reverting changes in the gameplay section, but it's our last chance to talk about one of the original members of the Final Fantasy team, Nasir Gebelli. Known and credited as just Nasir, he was one of the only members of the original team not from Japan, being an Iranian programmer who immigrated to the US in the late 70s. Soon after, he began programming video games and struck massive success with multiple releases before the great video game crash of '83. This dude was already known as a total rock star programmer long before Final Fantasy was a thing. He had basically retired due to the crash and had more than enough money to his name, so he was just traveling around the world, hanging out, being a fucking boss. Let me put it this way, when he was programming for Apple II games, he would write the code in his head and then enter it before he forgot the details. In case you don't believe me, here he is saying as much while being interviewed by John Romero, who can barely hide the childlike wonder of being in Nasir's presence.
The development system was pretty much like Apple.
Oh, really?
It was mini assembler, there was no assembler.
Oh, okay. I'm happy.
So, just getting there.
Did you ever use Merlin or anything like that? You were always mini assembler. Wow. No
always
comments.
mini assembler.
No comments or nothing.
Well, actually, on Apple, I think all the time that I did Apple, I never had a printer to even print a flowchart or do anything.
You just keep it in your head, right?
It was much easier to do it in my head, and because I was able to do it fast. If I were to do a game for 1 month, probably couldn't finish, or a couple of months, I probably couldn't finish it because I would forget all that stuff in my head.
Anyways, in 1986, Nasir, assumedly bored from jet-setting around the world, got the itch to program again, and his friend Doug Carlson, aka one of the fucking founders of Broderbund, clued him in about the rise of the Famicom. Doug flew with Nasir to Japan to introduce him to Masafumi Miyamoto, the founder and president of Square, where he was promptly hired. Sakaguchi no doubt rolled into work the next day only to pick up his jaw off the floor when he was told the world-famous Nasir was going to be the programmer for his silly little game. It would be like starting a garage band with your buddies and Geddy Lee shows up to play bass for you. Nasir was such an integral part of the Final Fantasy team that when making Final Fantasy 2 and 3, Nasir's work visa expired and he had to leave Japan. So the development team relocated to Sacramento, California and finished the production over there. No doubt a bit of a tribulation to get through, but the end result speaks for itself. Final Fantasy 3 is one of the largest NES games released on that system. Which, oddly enough, ties into the next point about Final Fantasy 3, its lack of ports. This might not qualify as background, but it has to go somewhere and saving it for the conclusion doesn't feel right. Final Fantasy 3 is kind of the lost game of the series. All other FF games have seen numerous ports and releases, from WonderSwan to PlayStation to Game Boy Advance, but Final Fantasy 3 has not. In fact, it took 16 years from its release to ever be officially touched again, being fully remade as a 3D game for the Nintendo DS. Outside of unofficial fan-translated emulation or re-releases on Virtual Console, all other ports of the game are based on this DS remake. The Pixel Remaster is the first real crack at the game in the original style, and probably the crowning jewel in terms of the Pixel Remaster's reason for existing. Now, there is a reason for this. Longtime school friend to Sakaguchi and original Final Fantasy team member Hiromichi Tanaka explains that Final Fantasy 3 was too fucking big that it was too tall a task to remake. When we developed FF3, the volume of content in the game was so huge that the cartridge was completely full, and when new platforms emerged, there simply wasn't enough storage space available for an update to FF3, because that would have required new graphics, music, and other contents. There was also a difficulty with how much manpower it would take to remake all of that content. There was an attempt made to do a WonderSwan remake like the previous Final Fantasies, but it proven to be just too damn large of a game to pull off. So around 2005, it was finally decided that Final Fantasy 3 would get remade, and Tanaka himself would be the big dog overseeing the project. In 2006, Final Fantasy 3 released on the Nintendo DS with a drastically new style, really new characters, and new changes. While I'm somewhat interested in the remake of FF3, especially since it looks like a lot of new work was added to the game, it would kind of betray the method of doing these games chronologically to play Final Fantasy 3 in what is very obviously a mid-2000s Squeenix era. During research into the DS remake, I became aware of enough changes made that, if anything, FF3 DS could qualify for its own video when the time comes. That's probably not happening though, don't hold your breath. It does not map onto the original FF3 accurately, so for that reason, we are going to stick to the Pixel Remaster. As mentioned in the last section, we could actually talk about presentation this time because of Final Fantasy III's DS remake, but I feel like doing so would be a mismatch for how the series looks at the advancement of Final Fantasy throughout the years. So instead, today the Final Fantasy person we are going to be looking at is the famous Nobuo Uematsu. Growing up as a self-taught pianist, Uematsu was working at a music rental shop when approached by Square to see if he wanted to compose for them. Originally, this was just a part-time job for him, making up his days doing part-time work for the music rental store and part-timing for Square. He met Sakaguchi when he was working on his pre-FF works like Rad Racer and 3D World Runner. With the release and subsequent success of Final Fantasy I, Uematsu pivoted to being a composer full-time, working with Square across many properties, but mostly famous for his work on the Final Fantasy series. I can only speak from my perspective, but growing up, Uematsu was the rock star composer. I didn't really know who was composing for the Mario or Zelda games, but I sure as hell knew who was composing for Final Fantasy. He feels like a landmark composer in terms of putting a name to the music. His songs are so successful and beloved that people needed to know who was behind it. Maybe other circles were more keyed in to people like Tim Follin and whatnot, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was culturally well known who Uematsu was. I kinda wanted to talk about his songs in each episode, but I really don't know what are the culturally big songs on each release. Like, I know once we get a little further in the series, classics like Battle on Big Bridge from 5, Dancing Mad from 6, literally everything from 7, but these early entries, I don't really have much to say other than, boy howdy, that sure is the iconic Final Fantasy theme. Since a lot of these soundtracks are fresh to me, I don't have an attachment to them the way I do for 7, which I will absolutely be camping out on when we get there. Uematsu started to wind down after FF9, with FF10 being the first mainline game not entirely composed by him. He would leave Square in 2004 and start up as a freelancer, still occasionally working with Final Fantasy games, but no longer as the big man on campus composer. On a personal level, Uematsu loves beer drinking, what? Pro wrestling, what? And raising some hell, what? In a 2019 interview with GameSpot, he revealed that he originally wanted to be a pro wrestler when he was younger. As much as Nobuo, the sound of violence Uematsu, would have been a big draw, brother, I think destiny led him on a path he was supposed to be on. Because quite frankly, Uematsu will go down in history as one of the most famous composers to ever grace video gaming, a title he has earned in spades. Final Fantasy III introduces one of the most foundational systems to the series, jobs. Oh god, capitalism has hit Final Fantasy. While the idea of structured classes dates back to common influences like Dungeons & Dragons, the job system greatly expands on the scope and freedom of standard RPG classes. Of course you have your warriors, thieves, black and white mages, yada yada, but now you have new and exciting jobs like Dark Knight, Viking, Scholar, Geomancer, and more. Final Fantasy III has 23 potential jobs for you to find and change into, some introducing unique battle commands for the first time, giving you a bevy of potential strategies and playstyles. I kinda love this as an extension of Final Fantasy I's party comp strategies. Like, way back in the day, there would be party challenges for FF1. Famously, one of the big questions was, can you beat FF1 with 4 white mages? Well, now you just have a fucking stupid amount of choices for your party comp to play with and challenge yourself. It does change slightly because you find these jobs as the game goes on, so it's not like you can just boot up a new save and enter the world with 4 evokers. But still, this inclusion of jobs is legendary. You could probably recreate the creepier wet meme with Final Fantasy games that are job system or not. There have been some changes made to how this system works between versions. All 3 versions of the game have significant job rebalancing, more on that later, but I'm more talking about capacity points. In the original, you would gain capacity points after battles, and the act of switching jobs would cost a certain amount of points depending on the skill levels associated. The 3D remake threw away capacity points for a job adjustment period, where you would incur a stats tax after changing jobs that would go away after enough battles. The Pixel Remaster version of the game has completely removed this, allowing for free switching whenever. Now each party member has their individual level, but they also have a job level associated with each job they've held. Experience for jobs is a little kooky. I believe in the original you gain job experience after attempting 5 actions per battle, including defending. In the Pixel Remaster, this is more of a standard 100-point hidden bar that will just fill with every action, netting a level up when it's full. It's a little nebulous on how all this works, so I might have gotten details wrong, but in short, there are 2 levels you are tracking between your character and job. Certain job-related skills are tied to job level, so at job level 20, the bard will learn a new song, for example. But many classes have no additional skills to learn, and job level more universally works like an effectiveness multiplier. My understanding is that it less affects your stats and more affects your specific job efficacies, like how much extra damage a Dragoon's jump will deal or how many physical attacks you will perform. I won't go over all the changes, but while the Pixel Remaster mostly stays in lane of the NES original, it does take specific cues from the 3D remake in terms of job abilities. These are widely additive, as the 3D remake had overhauled a fair amount of classes that were just a little underbaked originally. For example, in the original, the Scholar could only peep or scan, so either seeing an enemy's health or weakness respectively. In the 3D remake, these got combined into one action. The Scholar got up to level 3 of white and black magic, and they got item lore, which allowed them to increase potency with using items. The Pixel Remaster Scholar loses the ability to do white and black magic, but keeps everything else, bridging the gap between keeping the Scholar faithful to the original and making them not fucking useless. Other examples of changes kept would be Viking keeping Provoke and Bard changing how their songs work. Both of these changes make the characters different from their original versions, but in a way that makes them better characters at doing what they were supposed to do. There are more angles to these systems and gameplay overall, like a return to magic charges instead of a standard MP bar, but I'm going to be bringing them up in the body of the story section as they kinda have better context there. Likewise, describing the function of each job will happen when they are discovered in-game, instead of just barreling through all of them right now. Sorry if this is a little slight, but it feels so much better mentioning them as they arrive. I'm not sure if gameplay is the spot for this, but it feels kinda proper. I think it would be a bit of a failing to not bring up Dragon Quest III. In my Final Fantasy I video, I discussed how FF1 was made in the mold of Dragon Quest I, and how it kind of increased the scope that game introduced. Final Fantasy III, unintentionally or not, although I highly suspect intentionally, cribs directly from Dragon Quest III in a similar way. This is probably the last time we need to discuss Dragon Quest, but picking 3 is a whopper to talk about. It is quite frankly one of the most important JRPGs ever. It holds the same type of prestige that Final Fantasy would reach with the release of 7 and 10. Dragon Quest III was so successful that it sold 1 million copies the first day and caused hundreds of truancy cases with students ditching school to go get a copy. This release is the DQ game that introduced a class structure, allowing you to make your own party of class-based members and even allowing for a form of multi-classing once you leveled them high enough. I can't speak to if this was Final Fantasy trying to get in on the success of Dragon Quest III, or simply inspired by their direction yet again, but much like how FF1 is a bigger and badder version of DQ1, you can absolutely read FF3 as a bigger, badder version of DQ3. Similarly, this could have probably gone in presentation, but it feels better to talk about here. Final Fantasy III is the first game to feature a lot of the modernizations we now associate with the series. The NES version reworks the menus, showing damage values near the enemy, changes the black menu backgrounds to the iconic blue menu backgrounds, and probably most relevantly, the inclusion of auto-targeting. If 2 of your party members select the same enemy and it dies before they both attack, the remaining attack will redirect to another enemy. As much as I want to joke and say, and we never looked back, this really is one of the last pieces of making Final Fantasy the Final Fantasy we've known ever since. With Final Fantasy III returning to the structure of the first game, we are again given nondescript chosen ones who we name ourselves. This time around, I named them after my cats. Oh my god, look at them! They look like tiny little babies in their adventuring jammies. These Warriors of Light, commonly known by their starting class, the Onion Knight, are not just flatly introduced like in FF1. Our tutorial dungeon shows our party speak amongst themselves as they travel through the cavern, finding the Wind Crystal, and being bestowed the power to save the world from darkness. Most importantly, this gives us our first jobs: Fighter, Monk, White Mage, Black Mage, and Red Mage, aka the original choices from Final Fantasy I. You run home to the town of to talk to your adoptive father, the village elder Topapa. He's all wise and shit, so he already knows that you've been chosen by the crystal. Wow, way to be a fucking joy kill, Pops. Let us be excited and brag next time. Also in the town of we can kind of get the feel for FF3's tone. There's going to be a lot more secret passages and interactive items in the environment in this game. In fact, secret paths are one of the key details to this game. It's hard to get the idea across without mentioning it every time and thusly ruining it, but Final Fantasy III is way more lighthearted and funny. It's not like a knee slapper, but there's a vibrance and charm to the dialogue that makes for a more comedic tone on occasion. We explore to the town of Kazas, where everyone has been turned into ghosts. We are introduced to Cid, who's like, "Yep, this is me. Probably wondering how this happens. I wonder what my wife's gonna say." My fucking dude, I feel you, but you have so much more to worry about right now. He lets us know where his airship is and time. There we go, that's gotta be land speed record for how fast a Final Fantasy game gives you a vehicle. Go to Castle Sasune. Everyone there is chalk outlines too. Go to the cave, save Princess Sarah, bag up the evil Jin that ghosted everybody, save the day, and get the canoe for your troubles. Characters in this game will join your party, but only visually. Both Sarah and Sid tag along with you as a character trailing behind you, but otherwise offer no actual effect on combat. Sorry to blaze through all of this, but we got a lot of game to get to, and I'm not hanging around on Tutorial Island longer than I need to. Now that we can see that Sid is this game's version of Tom Bombadil, we get a mithril snout put on the ship, blast the boulder out of the way, destroy the ship in the process, and my friends, the adventure truly begins. Welcome to Final Fantasy III. Traveling with Sid to his home, the town of Canaan, he leaves your party and allows you to explore around for a little bit. There's lots of life in the town, especially when it comes to finding secrets and items. If you visit Sid's house, you will see that his wife has fallen ill. If you were resourceful enough, you will have found an elixir to give her, allowing her to do jumping jacks in celebration. This nets you access to Sid's basement of super goodies. Right next to Canaan is Dragon's Peak, where a traveler named Desh went. You can fight your way to the top quickly and get fucking scooped by the dragon. Here you find Desh hiding in the nest to avoid being eaten. He calls you a loser for being captured, which is bold ass words coming from someone who was also captured, and is like, I gotta be real with you, I can't remember shit right now. Maybe focus on yourself, buddy. Desh gives you the mini spell and joins your party so you can run from Bahamut. And I mean run, don't even try to get wise. And spill into a new part of the map. Right next to your landing point, you find the healing copse and a little baby man here.
Baby man, little baby man, little baby man, little baby man.
We talked about jobs during the gameplay section, but I was kinda burying the lead a little bit. This is where we get introduced to Final Fantasy III's trick. If you want to enter the gnome village of Tozus, you have to cast Mini on your entire party. One problem, when Mini, you basically cannot attack. So instead, what you want to do is switch your entire party to mages so they can all cast magic. Jobs in Final Fantasy III are much more than expression-based means of tackling challenges, they are verbs you use to solve puzzles. A lot more of this is going to show up as the game goes on. Tozus is a cute little place filled with whimsy. And drugs. If you give the town doctor an antidote, he opens up the tunnel for you to get out with. It's a very short jaunt, but any encounters you get here will include a magical fantasy mini version of the battle theme. Out of the tunnel is a cave of what you would assume are pirates, but I guess are Vikings. Could have fooled me. You can D-Mini here, which is a royal pain in my ass. Because Luna only has 2 level 2 charges, I need to D-Mini half my party, rest, D-Mini the other half, and rest again. Thankfully, you can buy Mini here in case you have a red mage like me, giving you at least 4 full charges, which you're gonna need. Anyways, the pirates, Vikings, have run into trouble because a sea monster wrecked all of their shit except one last boat, the Enterprise. The Viking boss tells you that if you can get rid of the sea monster, the Nepto Dragon, he will give you the Enterprise. With that, we can head to Nepto Temple and mini ourselves. Fuck! I miscalculated. Milky Way only has 1 level 2 charge for mini, so I gotta go fucking back and rest so I can mini my last party member. Jesus Christ, and you know what? I gotta blow some steam. I feel better now. Okay, now that we are small again, we can enter the temple. Now, you can fight the monsters on your way down this very slight dungeon, but I don't recommend it, because at the end, you find the giant rat. Oh man, you don't look that big. And because your only way to attack right now is magic, you gotta make sure that you have enough charges to actually finish the fight. The giant rat isn't hard, but he isn't a pushover, so you just gotta be able to go the distance with him. Successfully doing so nets you the Nepto Eye, allowing you to put it back on the dragon in the temple. He wakes up and declares that with his eye now complete, he can control his physical form and not be a ship-crushing menace. He gives you the Fang of Water as thanks, and you now have the Enterprise as your means of seafaring travel. You can try to take Desh back to Canaan, but he's not ready. Instead, we go exploring. To the southwest, you find Tokol, a village being besieged by Argus. To the west is the Living Woods, home to woodland fairies who have had their elder tree corrupted by Argus. These Argus guys sure seem to be evil. To the north, we find Castle Argus, but it's completely empty. Further north is the Tower of Owen, which we can enter, but it seems we need to become froggies to truly go anywhere. Northwest is the Chocobo Forest, where we can find our iconic feathered friend. Sadly, I don't ride him very long because just south of the forest is the western cave known as Gulgan Gulch, home to the sightless seers of the future. Here we can talk to their leader and learn the Toad spell, allowing us to enter the Tower of Owen and for Desh to find his destiny. Ooh, ominous. Much like the mini tribulation I went through earlier, I had an uneven amount of magic charges to toad my whole party, so I went back to Canaan, rested, toaded everyone, and then rested again so I had enough charges to untoad everyone when we got there. The Tower of Owen is the first real dungeon we've had so far, but even then it's quite tiny. It's 10 floors of climbing through very small room maps. Maybe I'm still suffering from Final Fantasy II PTSD, but playing these games so closely back to back is bewildering when you experience the difference in encounter rates. Also, while climbing the tower, Desh will start to get parts of his memory back. The boss of this tower is the Medusa, who was a bit of a pushover. I was pretty easily able to keep up the DPS while Luna healed my party. Medusa can stare you down to petrify a party member, something the game has been giving you gold needles to avoid, but it didn't happen to me at all. After you smoke her alive, Desh realizes his true destiny. He is an ancient who is awoken when the tower is in danger. The continent will crumble if the tower falls, and Medusa has already done damage to it, so Desh sacrifices himself to save the tower. It's been a blast. Literally. My dude keeping it jovial in the face of self-sacrifice. With the tower saved, the gigantic cyclone blocking the path goes away and allows us to further explore the seas. Desh mentioned some dwarven islands, so a little bit of sailing gets us to their cave. They are a merry little bunch, other than their ice horn being stolen by some vile thief. He scampered off to an underwater cavern, and dwarves can't swim worth a lick, so you know what that means. Caro time, motherfuckers. The suburban lake ain't half bad, but these ruinous waves cast bad breath, which sucks. We should maybe make mention of this now. Status effects are fucking online in FF3. FF1 and FF2 had the ability for status effects, but they didn't come into play other than some poisons and charms. In FF3, hopefully the amount of froggies and minis can clue you into how much dealing with status changes is a factor. Regardless, the cavern's only like 3 floors, so if you can dodge status effects, it won't take very long for you to find the thief. Gutsco. Wow, that name feels so hard to say properly. Gutsco is a bit tanky, but otherwise doesn't pose much of a threat. Between his hits and his fire magic, you should be able to heal yourself back up turn after turn and outpace him to his defeat. You retrieve the Horn of Ice, and it follows you around. I assume that's what that's supposed to be. Getting back to the dwarves, you replace the Horn of Ice, only to find that the odd thing following you back was actually Gutsco in hiding. With no one expecting him, he steals both ice horns and heads to the Molten Cave up north to get the Fire Crystal. I know I must sound like a broken drum, but the Molten Cave is again a very slight dungeon. Only a couple floors and not much going on to distract you. The enemies here are among the strongest we've seen so far, but it's not insurmountable. On the last floor we touch this rock to unlock the secret passage to the Fire Crystal, and Fine Gutsco has already made it there. With the crystal's power, he transforms, attacks the party, and hands me my first party wipe. This fight is pretty hard. Gutsco can cast Flame, which hits the entire party for good damage, and he can cast it pretty repeatedly. My first run was totally destroyed by running face first into like flame after flame after flame back to back, and it eventually just whittling my party down faster than I could heal. This took me a couple attempts to beat, all of which ended with Hammy being dead as roadkill because he couldn't tank 7 straight flames. I debated switching him to a different class, but because he had Blizzara, he was my highest damage dealer for this fight. Anyways, sorry dude, but you're further behind the curve now. With victory, our party is blessed by the Fire Crystal.
The crystal.
And we get our first real look at new jobs. Thief is self-explanatory. He has high agility and can steal, but he also has the Scram command to help escape battles easier. Knight is an upgraded warrior, boasting better stats and the guard ability, as well as covering a party member when they are in red health. Ranger specializes in combat from the back row, and gets a bit of a buff in this version because arrows are not single-use items, making their barrage command fucking nice. Finally, Scholar can analyze enemies to see their health and weakness, as well as being able to use the Alchemy command to make items more effective in combat. He also uniquely equips elemental books as weapons, which I thought was going to be like some bespoke elemental magic attacks, but no, he literally just goes upside your head with a hardcover. Also, let's briefly touch on job switching again to cover some of its annoying nuances. Switching between jobs understandably removes all of your equipment. It's kind of a pain in the ass to reattach everything, but the Pixel Remaster does have the optimal equipment option, and usually that gets you 80% of the way there. The bigger pain in the ass is that switching jobs depletes your magic charges. That's right, we are back on Final Fantasy I by way of Dungeons & Dragons magic charges. You have multiple levels of magic strength and you can learn 3 spells of each level, but only a certain amount of charges available. I've talked about it previously in this video, but it's important to reiterate here because when you switch your job and lose all your charges, you have to blow a rare MP healing item in the form of an elixir or rest to get them back. So, for example, if I take Luna, who has full magic charges, and turn her into a thief, she loses all her charges. Makes sense, the thief isn't a magic wielding character. But if I go from thief back to white mage, Luna still has no charges, kinda killing the point of switching back if I was in the middle of a dungeon or something. This is different if you switch between magic classes, so if I take Luna from white mage to red mage, she loses some charges to hit the caps required when playing as a red mage, and she will retain those numbers when switching back to white mage, where she still has higher charge caps. This is really finicky and kind of the nail in the coffin for magic charges as a system. I didn't mind them at all in Final Fantasy I, but in 3, I think they synergize with the job system very poorly, and would overall be better replaced by just a standard MP bar that could be rendered null when changing into non-magic classes, and not cap thanks to character stats, or at least not cap as much when dealing with job stats. Before we can get back to the dwarves, a resident of Tokul stumbles in needing our help. The village has nothing left to plunder, so Hien and his Arcus soldiers are going to burn it to the ground. Before he passes, he tells you that his scholar is really gonna be necessary for that fight. Big ol' hint hint, buddy. The dwarves have both of their ice horns back, and they are so happy about it that one of them moonwalks to the treasury and lets you go haywire with new toys. Going back to Tokul, the party is immediately trapped and thrown into some sort of woody prison. The King of Argus is here, explaining that Hien got a hold of dark powers, went mad with it, and overtook the kingdom. One of his guards clues you into the small hole in the wall you can escape from, giving you Mini in case you didn't already have it. I'm gonna keep beating this dead horse, but the dungeon is rather small and nondescript, leading to a showdown with Hien at the end of it. So in preparation of this fight, I had Milky Way as a sorcerer to scout his weakness, as was basically told to me, and I figured if I'm scouting for elemental weaknesses, I should keep Hammy as a black mage. This was the correct play, but maybe a little unnecessary as we'll find out. So obviously the point of this fight is to use your scholar to study Hien, find his elemental weakness, and deal bonus damage via that. In execution, this is harder than it seems. Every time Hien changes weaknesses, you will have to queue up the next round of attacks with no knowledge because it takes one full turn to get that information. What makes this dickish is that Hien changing his weakness is always the first thing that happens in a turn, meaning that you might have a turn or two of knowledge, queue up another turn of elemental attacks against his weakness, and before that turn fires off, Hien will switch to something completely different that could possibly heal him based on what elements you're attacking with. This happened to me a couple times, which was annoying, but overall not too bad, because of one thing: the Scholar's alchemy ability. I had collected a number of one-time attack items that dealt elemental damage, and alchemy boosted the damage on these to a stupid degree, making my Scholar greatly outpower my black mage. Even with the accidental heal or two, Milky Way did so much fucking damage that it didn't take long to reduce Hien to a fine red mist. With Hien defeated, you find that the woody prison that you are in is actually the Elder Tree from the Living Woods. He returns home to let out your party, the King of Argus, and all his men, followed by closing off the Living Woods for 1,000 years to heal from his time corrupted by dark magic. Before he slumbers, he gives you the Fang of Wind. Returning to Argus, the king will give you an item called the Wheel of Time, and tells you to take it to Cid back in Canaan. There is also some handy world information from one of these nights, as he tells you that the continent you are on is actually a floating continent. Before you leave, there are some locked doors at the top of the castle. If you change someone in your party over to a thief, you can unlock them and get the goodies. including 2 elixirs. Hot damn. Going back to Canaan, Cid will take the Wheel of Time and make your water ship an airship as well. With this, you can do more exploring around the rest of the continent. Just be aware you can only dock on water. To the east is a small farming town of Gishal, a quaint little place. You can find the Gishal Greens here, an item that makes the fat chocobo appear in the western Chocobo Woods. You can store items with him, I guess. More importantly is that to the west also holds the Village of the Ancients. This town, Lost Time, holds the creators of civilization and some interesting lore about the world as we know it. They are the ones who made this continent float, using the Tower of Owen as power to help keep it in the sky. You'll remember that Desh realized he was an ancient and had to defend the tower, so this all ties into that. We also learn that light and darkness may be 2 sides of the same coin as opposed to good and bad. An ancient talks about how a catastrophe of light was brought upon the world and there was a need for 4 warriors of dark to return balance. I kind of love this, the idea that this isn't an inherent heroes and villains story, but a large-scale fight to keep the world in balance. With everything explored, it's time to take the plunge. By flying past the bounds of your home continent, you find an expansive sea almost devoid of other land. This is so fucking cool, dude. I was wondering why the map was so small for the first couple hours, and having this massive expansion where the world outside dwarfs the world you once knew is a really powerful moment. Northeast from your home is a small island with a wrecked ship on it. Inside you find a wizard who explains that a massive earthquake sunk most of the land in the world, with him and this sick woman being the only survivors he knows. You can heal her with an antidote and find that she is Arya, the Water Temple priestess. She joins her party in an attempt to get back to the Water Temple and undo the curse that befell the world when the water crystal sank in the earthquake. Take Arya to the Water Temple. She grabs the shard of the water crystal. You need to take this to the caverns behind the temple and put it with the rest of the water crystal. The Cave of Tides is maybe just a little longer than previous dungeons, but it does try to zigzag on you with a couple false paths to dead ends. The enemies here are a bit of an ass kicker, but only because Milky Way is a front row scholar and has the defense of wet tissue paper. After 4 floors, you find the water crystal and Arya activates it. However, a cloaked assassin attempts to take you out with a cursed arrow, but Arya pushes you out of the way and takes it herself. This is the Kraken, and watch in awe as I job this motherfucker out. So, turn 1, Milky Way studies the Kraken and sees it's weak to lightning. Turns 2 through death, Milky Way uses alchemy-powered lightning items to blow a fucking hole in the Kraken in record time. Yeah, the Scholar's a little weak, but goddamn does alchemy rule. With the Kraken defeated, Arya is about to pass. She grants you the power of the water crystal, giving us our next set of jobs. Geomancer will cast random magic depending on the environment they are in, with no magic costs associated. Evokers are your summoner class, able to summon monsters into battle to do either a status-based effect or a damage-based effect. Bards are a spellcaster class that can learn up to 4 unique song spells as they level. These do not have MP costs either, but it's a much smaller pool to choose from. Vikings are the tank of the game, equipping the best armor and able to draw attacks away from other party members with a taunt. This Pixel Remaster version doesn't have information online I can find anywhere, so I'm not sure if it lowers defense like in the 3D release, and I also think it only works against an opponent's physical attack. If they are going to cast magic, they can still target whoever they like. Dark Knights can only wield dark weapons and can strike all enemies with their Blade Blitz attack. Their dark attacks can stop enemies who split or duplicate. If that sounds highly specific, it is. They are also 100% not online right now. This job does not become real for many more hours thanks to the lack of dark weapons available. Black belts are fucking powerhouses, doing big damage, able to boost their damage to even bigger values, and kick all enemies in one swoop. The downside is that they have a chin made out of glass. Finally, one of the most iconic Final Fantasy jobs ever, the Dragoon. This spear-wielding class can jump, spending a full turn in the sky and away from any damage before coming down with a monstrous strike. The awakening of the water crystal causes another earthquake, but this one brings the land back up. After 3 days of recovering, you awake to find yourself in the newly raised town of Amur. You'll never believe this, but someone put a fucking boot on your ship and you can't sail or fly anywhere. It turns out that Goldor, the rich bitch around town, has chained up your ship because he doesn't trust you. He's in a pure gold mansion down south, that may also have the last crystal within. One problem: you need a pair of levy grass shoes to cross the bottomless bog that is before Daddy Warbucks' manor. Apparently, a crazed hag named Delilah is in the sewers, and she has a pair of the old stompin' boots. But there's a problem. 4 of them. 4 old-timers are LARPing as the Warriors of Light. Or maybe they actually just believe that they are the real dudes? The mayor gets you all access to the sewers. Short dungeon, shocker, I know, where you end up bailing them out of a tight jam. So you 4 were the legendary heroes? Could have sworn it was us. Oh my fucking god, you guys. Get back to the retirement home. They are a nice bunch though. They help you out with Delilah by warning you about the trap shoes. Oh man, Delilah nearly sent the world spiraling into darkness. She was about to hit the Warriors of Light with the fucking trap shoes. No one's ever survived the trap shoes. Anyways, they vouch that you actually need them. Delilah apologizes for trying the old trap shoes on you, and the 4 geezers, use their magical power to warp you all out. What in the f***? Moving on, travel south to find Goldor's mansion, and past the bog to get there. You know, for being a manor, Casa de Goldor is kinda tiny. You know, because the dungeon is small. Man, oh man, oh man, oh man. I'm gonna be filthy rich when I get back into town. Outside of finding what locked door will take you to Goldor, this area is like 4 rooms, and you will quickly see him guarding the Earth Crystal. Goldor's boss fight is a party I came dressed to incorrectly. So he has a massive, I mean literally nullifying resistance to magic, making Luna and Hammy almost useless. Milky Way's taunt was also not exactly working as intended, so it was all down to Nimbus. With Luna and Hammy on healing and Nimbus's massive boost damage, I was able to grind this boss fight out, but it took a while and cost me many a resource. Once defeated, Goldor goes out like a sore loser, smashing the Earth Crystal into a million pieces. While we are able to unchain our ship, this is a mighty blow to our mission. In our quest to do something about this broken crystal, we now have a huge amount of landmass to explore. While flying around, I found a mountain pass way too windy to enter, as well as an ominous passageway blocked by what seem to be these towering statues. Crossing the oceans, we find a small island village called Duster, home to geomancers and bards. To the north of the new continent, we find Replito, home to evokers. To the center of the landmass, we find ourselves fucking shot down. Oh fuck. Welcome to Saronia, a huge kingdom that is about to play a very deadly game of Red Rover. Oh, let me just squeeze right by. For some reason, the king has gone mad, pitted his armies against each other, shuttered all the stores in the kingdom, and exiled his son, Prince Alice. We can find the prince being shaken down in the southwest Saronia and save him, joining our party as he hopes he can find a way to solve this mad king problem. To the southeast, we find the Dragon Spire, a tower that contains an extremely conspicuous amount of equipment for dragoons. I'm sure the citizen telling me about how dragoons were helpful against the creature Garuda is some sort of hint towards something, but I can't seem to put the pieces together just yet. Now that Alice is in tow, we can get into Saronia Castle. Once inside, the king attempts to assassinate his own son, but cannot fully go through with it and turns the knife on himself. Wormtongue here was manipulating the king, and when confronted, turns into Garuda. Let's set the record straight. I knew about 2 things about Final Fantasy III outside of the surface level stuff like it being the game with jobs. The one thing I've actually heard about was the Garuda boss fight. I was under the impression that this was going to be one of the really big walls in this game. Like this was going to be an ordeal for me to get through. It took 2 turns. See, I do this thing in RPGs where I talk to townsfolk, and inside Saronia, there's more than enough gigantic fucking hints that dragoons might be the answer here. In a sense, this is a puzzle boss because I'm sure it's beatable normally, but there is an answer to the puzzle, and it's just to have 4 dragoons and all of them jumping like you're in a bounce house at your cousin's high school graduation. It's a cinch. The king passes from his injuries and Alice takes the throne, promising a new era of peace. Outside of the throne chamber, these mages will alert you that Dalg is the next destination as we need the power of the mages there. The engineering corps will give you a new airship, the Nautilus, as the Enterprise was blasted to smithereens. The Nautilus has the power to make it through the windy passage we found earlier, so let's hop to it. Past the turbulent mountain pass, we find Doga's manor, where we are immediately jumped by Moogles. Oh my god, it's our favorite little babies. Doga calls them off once he senses that you are the Warriors of Light and gives you a heavy exposition breakdown. In short, Doga is one of the disciples of the mage Noah, the other disciples being Yunie and Xandi. I am absolutely winging it on these pronunciations. With Noah's passing, he gifted all of his disciples a power. Yunie rests in the land of dreams, and Xandi was given human mortality or something, I don't know. He's pissed about it, and he's the reason there's the darkness and balance in the world. Furthermore, the Earth Crystal was not shattered. That was a phony gold crystal that made gold for losers who want more gold. The real Earth Crystal is alive and well. Doga joins your party, and you make your way to another mini dungeon. I just play the shrink sound effect. There's not much of a reason to de-mini in this dungeon because by now you have access to so many magic-based classes that you can easily ride out the storm. At the end of the Cave of the Circle, Doga will cast a spell that allows the Nautilus to submerge underwater, because that's how engineering works. Also importantly, Doga will let you know your next objective. South of Saronia, under the sea at Cape Twin Horn, is the Temple of Time, where you can find Noah's Lute, which allows us to call back Yunie from the world of dreams. The area the Temple of Time is in is pretty obvious, so you dive below, enter the temple, and promptly get your shit blown out. The enemies in this dungeon are not fucking around. They hit like a bulldozer, and anytime I would run into a group of Chimera mages, I would get my ass taken off and handed back to me. There were multiple party wipes just trying to get out of the temple to regroup my party and think of a better plan of attack. Because my first party jobs were still my highest leveled, I swapped almost everyone back to their original mage roles, which just gave better magic defense. This made it better, but still pretty difficult. I've straight up stopped mentioning it, but the dungeon itself is only 3 or so floors. Still, it's the hardest one yet. All of the doors are locked, which means you need a key or to switch to a thief. But don't be like me and switch one of your mages to a thief and then realize that you have no fucking magic charges when you switch back. No boss in this area to block you from Noah's Loot, thankfully, because honestly the trip here had enough assholes pushing your shit in. With the loot, we can go to Yunie's cavern and wake her from the land of dreams. She springs awake with knowledge of the situation from Doga and tells us we need to get the Invincible, a ship strong enough to handle mountains. It's off to the ancient cavern to find it, but before we leave, she hands us the Fang of Fire. She's also kind enough to explain what the dick these things are for. You need them to get past those cool towering barricades we saw earlier, which will lead us to Xandi's hideout. Before we tackle the ancient cavern, there is an optional dungeon in the deep southeastern area, the Sunken Cave. Enemies here are not as diabolical as the Temple of Time, so I was able to return to my preferred party status. Sunken Cave is even smaller than normal, as it is a glorified armory, allowing you to supermarket sweep your way around and snag all sorts of absolutely wonderful loot. There are 4 hidden treasure chests that feature an old friend from Final Fantasy II, the Treasure Chest Ambush. Each of these 4 battles feels like a mini-boss, being a totally unique enemy. They all go down easy enough, sans the Eater fight, which was a bit of a pain because they kept multiplying and Luna couldn't hit an earthquake spell to save her life. With our riches in tow, we get back to the ancient cavern. Once inside, we see that there has been a whopper of a cave-in, stopping all progress and trapping these explorers as buddies inside. Thankfully, Yunie can enter the Dream Realm and clear the rocks and grant us access. Inside, we find the other explorers and the inexplicable marketplace they have here. We get more of the monsters we saw in the treasure chests at Sunken Cavern, including the ones that multiply and divide unless killed. This is supposed to be something the Dark Knight can take care of, as his class ability is to negate this shit, but we don't have dark weapons yet, so that job is still offline. Between the Black Belt and the Geomancer, it didn't faze me much. What does get stuck in my craw is the dungeon design. I'm sorry, I need to go off. This is easily the biggest dungeon in the game at 7 floors deep, but you would never know unless paying attention. Each floor is just a linear path with occasional random battles. Maybe the design idea is that you are Wolfenstein 3Ding this bitch, hugging all the walls looking for secret paths and whatnot, because those things are very prevalent in this game. But there aren't any in this dungeon, so it just becomes this utterly boneless walk through a space with very little in terms of pathing other than a chest that might be slightly off path in a room. It's fucking nothing, dude. At the bottom you find the Invincible, your newest whip. Unie gives you the Grand Tour, and I'm not being facetious because this bad boy is full service. You have your own store, own bed, and even your own fat chocobo. Still haven't really figured out the need to store items with this guy yet. Unie departs from your party, telling you to head to the Cave of Shadows for the last of the elemental fangs. We got somewhere else to be first. Now that we can hop over a bit of mountain pass, we can visit the town of Falgabard, aka the town that finally lets Dark Knights be a job you can use. Much like previous towns being home to certain jobs, Falgabard is Dark Knight themed and allows you to purchase dark weapons. While a basic dark sword is available for purchase, there is a hidden path to the Waterfall Cavern where you can fight a mini-boss for a significantly better dark blade. The mini-boss is a little tough because he hits so fucking hard, but it's not at all insurmountable. There is also the Falgabard Cavern to explore, a small zone that acts as a Dark Knight training room. As previously mentioned when we first got the job, Dark Knights can use Blade Blitz to attack all enemies at once, and Dark Swords will negate any enemy's ability to multiply or divide when attacked. In execution, this felt a bit shallow. Luna wasn't exactly chunking for big damage as a Dark Knight, so it was still most effective to have Nimbus Black Belt kick all the enemies, and who cares if they increase in numbers because another kick or two is going to do more than enough damage. Also, the cavern is kind of a modernization concession. In the original NES game, you do not see the hidden paths when entering them, so this becomes a lot more maze-like. But in the Pixel Remaster, they do you enough of a solid to sidestep fumbling along in the dark to get all the treasure. Enough with the Dark Knight training grounds, let's get to the real thing. To find the Cave of Shadows, we have to do a long sequence of mountain hopping, intercut with occasional random battles. These battles are cute though because you start the fight off with artillery support. Once you find the path to the cave, you get what is going to be the first real dungeon-ass feeling dungeon in the game. Cave of Shadows rules. This dungeon is multiple times bigger and longer than everything that's come before. There are many more floors and rooms to traverse, and a lot of the pathways are long enough to cause interruptions from random battles. All of the battles are against decently tough opponents that can divide or multiply, making your Dark Knights still star of the show. The limitations of not wanting to attack improperly and fill the screen with 9 assholes creates a better strategic idea for the encounters in the Cave of Shadows, and it did a great job of keeping me engaged. Also, the cave is similarly based around hidden paths, which would be a fucking nightmare in the original game, but still works even with the Pixel Remaster concessions. You aren't spending your time blindly bumping into walls, but you can see additional paths of goodies that you would have otherwise missed and end up having you double back to get everything. The concept still works even if the difficulty has been greatly knocked down. The boss here was really quick, but only because of a double boosted attack from Nimbus that did like 5,000 damage. Eating back-to-back turns of Quake hurt a lot, and it set up the boss for killing Hammy right before Nimbus hit the final blow. Once again, poor Hammy ends another encounter missing out on precious experience points. With all 4 fangs, we can remove each of the barriers to the north, seeing the Ancient's Maze and the Earth Crystal inside. We have to do battle with Titan before we claim it. Titan is literally just another run at the Hecatonshare fight, but with more health and the ability to cast Flare. It's tougher, and Hammy still died a couple times, but I was able to end the fight with him alive at the end, thankfully. With Titan defeated, we snag the last of the 4 objects that puts us on our path, the Earth Crystal.
The crystal.
This nets us the last of our jobs. Kinda. The Devout, the Magus, and the Summoner. These jobs are all strict upgrades to spellcasters, Devout being a better White Mage, Magus being a better Black Mage, and Summoner being a better Evoker. Notably, the Summoner does not have a buff summon and the attack summon to randomly rely on. Instead, they always summon a powered up attack that hits all enemies. With all the crystals rescued, we must return to Doga and Unie. They immediately summon us into some sort of subterranean dungeon and beckon us deeper. Obviously, the vibes are really off right now, especially when you find the Pit of Skeleton Bones. Contrary to what it may seem though, Doga and Unie have not turned on you, but things are about to get physical. They are attempting to make a key to Eureka, a process that requires a significant amount of energy. The kind of energy that can only be seized through fighting. So even though they are not baddies, we have to do a back-to-back boss battle. Doga and Yunie are not that difficult, but with their powerful spells, they can occasionally burst down a party member to where they're going to get smoked if you don't immediately heal them. Doga was a bit easier for me because he spent a lot of turns draining instead of casting powerful magics. With both of their physical forms destroyed, Doga and Yunie prepare to help you from the spirit world. They tell you to travel to Circus Tower to defeat Xandi and give you the Circus Key and the Eureka Key. It's time to save the world. Or maybe we can do that later. There's some good cleanup stuff we can do before marching into the endgame. The last 3 summon spells are not purchasables. They are 3 optional boss battles. You have to beat Odin, Leviathan, and Bahamut to use their summons, and each of them have their own dungeons to go through. All 3 of these dungeons are short, even compared to normal FF3 dungeons, but they are loaded with loot to grab. Both Odin and Leviathan are nothing special compared to the bosses you've faced up till now, but Bahamut. Oh buddy, Bahamut. This fucking guy wrecked me bad. My spellcaster-centric team wasn't an awful idea, because Bahamut is weak to wind magic, which my Devout has, but she's way too busy keeping everyone alive. Bahamut will not stop casting Mega Flare. I wiped this boss because I couldn't outpace a Mega Flare every turn. So I swapped into a 2 Dragoon composition and wiped to that as well. On my 3rd attempt, I got him, and I'll be real, it could be because he physically attacked for 1 lone turn. Yay, now I can cast Bahamut. With my summoner fully stacked, it's time to blow this taco stand. Back we go to the ancient maze. This zone isn't much, it's really a housing for this large forking area. While confusing to navigate, it's more of a linear path with dead ends than a maze, so outside of having to double back for items, it's not too frustrating. The encounters here feel hot and heavy, like maybe a little higher of an encounter rate than previous even. It's a bit of a tax to constantly battle through all of this, but eventually you will exit and stare down the Crystal Tower. Okay, remember how I said I knew like 2 things about Final Fantasy III? Here's the second one. All that bitching about dungeon length was about to come back and bite me in the ass, because the Crystal Tower is notorious for being the final dungeon in this game, and it being a fucking trial. This place is known for being long and difficult, a league of which hasn't been seen to this point of the game. Thankfully, we have some help. If you remember, you got a key to Circus and a key to Eureka. Entering this mirror will take you to the realm of Eureka, where the strongest weapons are. But that's not all, because there are loads of strong items and stronger enemies to be found. Eureka is a bit of an ass kicker of a dungeon. It's got significantly more buff enemies than before, and the multiple floors are large enough to get run up on time and time again. But what really kicks your teeth in is the boss gauntlet you're about to do. There are numerous premier weapons to be found in Eureka, but each of them requires you to do battle with a mini-boss. There is nothing mini about these encounters. All of them are certified shit stompers, and it will make for long and arduous fights. Especially if you have a tough party composition. In fact, I had to burn some of my rare elixirs just to get more magic charges for my spellcasters. Ninja was a slog, but I got through it. Amon is another run at the Hien fight, meaning you need to work around changing elemental weaknesses. Thankfully, my Devout did learn Libra, so I could do the scholar's work without having him in the party. This was probably the easiest of the bunch. Kunoichi can fuck right off. She's not crazy powerful, but every time she cast Eroga, I was in danger of losing a full human being. She's also where I was running into the problem that would plague me during the next fight. My magic wasn't doing a whole lot. Guardian is less powerful, as I was able to out-heal his damage, but this fight was dragging because I was doing such piddly damage to him. This felt like the first real point in the game where I had to interact with the job system in an actual strategic way. Like, previously it was very puzzle boxy. You would need to pick the jobs that solve the fight, so to speak. I was now sitting down and smoking my smart weed to figure out what the most effective party comp could be to tackling this bullshit. And here comes said hogwash, because it's time for the Cycla fight. Fuck this dude. He hits like a Mack truck, nukes party members with Holy, can cure himself with Curaja. This fight was diabolical. It was a war, but one very well worth it. Unlike all the other mini-bosses which dropped some endgame weapons, Cycla dropped the Elder Staff, giving you the final 2 jobs. Sage, who is Summoner, Devout, and Magus rolled into one, and Ninja, the best physical attacker in the game, and the person who will be killing the final boss thanks to throwing shurikens. While not as hard as Cycla, the last boss down here is Guardian. He was still no slouch, but after Cycla I was not going to be denied any longer. The end of Eureka's dungeon features some sages that are selling the highest powered magic in the game, as well as other expensive goodies. Now that we have the most brolic equipment possible, it's time to tackle the Crystal Tower. Let's set the stage for a second here. The Crystal Tower is massive. It's easily the biggest dungeon in this game, and all of the encounters within are out to collect your head. That's not in and of itself that bad. Here's where it gets fucked up. The tower is surrounded by the Ancient's Maze, meaning if you need to save, you can exit the tower to find a slice of world map to do it on, but anything more than that requires going back through the maze. There are no camps or cottages in Final Fantasy III, so if you need to heal, or more relevantly, need to recover your magic charges, you need to fight through the maze again to make it to your ship, rest there, then fight back through the maze to get to the Crystal Tower again. The only item you have that can recover magic charges are elixirs, and you can't buy them at the Invincible shop, so if you want to recover magic during this sequence, you either fight back to the ship or blow an elixir. Remember, changing classes does not recover magic charges, so you can't try to game the system and physical job your way through the maze in Crystal Tower and then switch to spellcasters again. If you can believe it, this is the easy modernized version. In the NES original, it's even fucking harder. For starters, I do not believe Phoenix Downs are purchasable at stores, making an even more necessary item a costly proposition to use. But what makes it diabolical is what happens when you run in the original. Attempting to flee combat in this version will reduce your defense to 0, making for every attack against you while waiting to flee hit like a sniper bullet through the chest. At least in the modern versions, there's slightly more ability to flee from monsters when getting back to where you are, but in the original, this could cost you dearly. With all of that out of the way, let's tackle the tower. So I did 2 attempts at the tower, the first one being to grind and get all of the treasures. Many chests are out of the way on each floor, so for the sake of saving my magic charges, I did one run based entirely around grabbing all the goodies, so my second run would be as straight of a shot as possible. The layout of the tower isn't necessarily confusing, but it is a bit more loopy than dungeons previous. Lots of getting turned around or taking a dead-end path to help pile on those dangerous encounters. Once you get high enough, to the 5th floor I believe, you can start getting rare encounters with dragons. These dudes are full-fledged bosses. Not the most destructive baddie around, but they have monstrous HP values. I was blowing multiple of my precious Bahamut summon just on one of them, and he still wasn't going down. The good news is that for all your troubles, you're going to get some vital items like Phoenix Downs, elixirs, and endgame ornaments, as well as killer experience point gain. Once I got to what I assumed was the top, I teleported out to rest and scaled it again. This time I ran for many more fights using a cheeky strategy with the Bard. Even with this tower being home to some of the real beefy boys, there are many a fight I could run from and take a hit or two without consequence. However, the cracked thing about the Bard is that his sing command always goes first. So I could have him start every round by healing and then everyone else attempts to escape. Now, I was still fighting bigger random encounters because they were too scary to run from, and also I do want the experience. But this helped a lot with not blowing magic charges on the rank and file encounters. At the top of the tower is a mirror that when gazed into, traps your party and activates the 5 worms in this room. In order to escape this ordeal, the spirit of Doga must find 5 hearts of light to fight back. He goes and retrieves Princess Sarah, Cid, Desh, who is alive after all, Prince, or actually now King Alice, and one of the 4 old coot LARPers. While this is a nice way to tie a lot of the story together in one climactic feel-good moment, the last inclusion feels a little goofy. But that's the spirit of Final Fantasy III. It's a lovely goofball game. With the situation diffused, we can move forward and finally meet the big bad, Xandi. The Xandi boss fight is tough, but it's not impossible. He is constantly throwing out big damage spells, but my party is mostly able to tank and recover. I did blow a lot of high-level offensive magic like Bahamut, but in the end, I was able to beat him without too much of a struggle. Poor Hammy didn't make it though. Being a bard is a rough trade, and he would die at full health from something like Meteor unless he had a defensive buff applied. With Xandi defeated, he warps into the Cloud of Darkness and promptly fucks up your entire party. While our heroes lay defeated, the 5 Hearts of Light come in to encourage us to get back in the game. In their final act of support, the spirits of Doga and Yunie revive us with the last of their energy, finally dissipating into the heavens afterwards. Xandi is merely a puppet of the darkness, so we must enter the darkness's world and kill it to save the day. The World of Darkness is fucking tough. You have 4 areas to go to, each of which will contain a monster box with a Xandi clone and a air quotes mini boss. Defeating each Xandi clone will net you a ribbon, so if you don't have a full set of those yet, these fights are well worth it. The 4 mini bosses are fucking insane. The 2-headed dragon is a physical powerhouse, doing only melee attacks, but constantly holding the power to one-shot almost anyone on my party with the right attack. Even with defensive buffs, Nimbus and Hammy could not survive being hit with a full strength strike at max HP. He's also tanky as shit, so I blew the farm on taking this guy down. Conversely, Cerberus was primarily a spellcaster and kind of a cakewalk. They stuck to high-level elemental damage, and my party was totally built to weather that storm. So while Cerberus still took a lot of time to take down, it wasn't nearly as sweaty. Echidna was also a spellcaster, but more focused on high-powered single-target shots like Flare. While my party was mostly able to tank one of these, a Flare into Quake combo could spell death for someone not on the up and up. Once I had an established pattern set, I was able to out-attrition Echidna and win, but it was an ordeal that took some time. Ahriman feels almost exactly like the Echidna fight by virtue of there only being so many endgame spells an enemy can have. The strategy is much the same, but with more Meteor than Flare going on. Once again, difficult and a long time to defeat, but not much more difficult than what you did with the Echidna. After each mini-boss, you find one of the 4 dark elemental crystals and a warrior of darkness from it. They all tell you to fight back to maintain the harmony of light and darkness in the world, as well as these crystals doing a full revive and heal when you touch it. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that concession was not in the NES version. This forms an interesting parallel to the first Final Fantasy. Like that game, FF3 mainly focuses all the story and difficulty on the very end. Sure, it spreads out a little better than FF1 on the lead up, but it's very much the heavy hits at the 11th hour. But there's also this feeling that like the first 15 or so hours of the game is all set up and prep for the last 2 or 3. You know how in FF1 and 2, the final bosses are drastic jump ups in difficulty? The Tower, the World of Darkness, and all the boss battles within are so fucking difficult in comparison to the rest of the game that it feels designed around the idea that everything you've done until now was in preparation for when the game actually kicks in. What I'm trying to get across is that FF3 pre and post Crystal Tower feel almost like different games because the act of playing it changes so much. With the 4 Guardians of the Dark Crystals completed, it's time to take on the Cloud of Darkness again. Before the fight, the 4 Warriors of Dark show up to help weaken the cloud for you. Once in battle, you have the tankiest motherfucker in the game ahead. Because this is the last boss, there's no holding back on your best weapons, meaning I blew all 5 shurikens on the Cloud of Darkness, doing absolutely insane max damage to them. It was nowhere near enough. If I'm being honest, this boss is a bit disappointing. Cloud of Darkness is powerful and has HP values higher than calculators can compute, but the fight itself is very one note. Cloud will cast Particle Beam almost every single turn, which means that every turn and response is the same thing. Heal up the damage from Particle Beam and keep attacking. There were some breaks in the action to put elixirs on Nimbus and Luna so they could refill their magic charges, but that was kinda it. Occasionally, Cloud of Darkness would get off 2 particle beams before Luna could get a chance to heal, but it didn't take much to recalibrate and get back on track. Really, it just felt like Cloud of Darkness is a stats check to beat the game. If you can't survive Particle Beam, then you need to grind up. If you can survive it, you just need to, once again, out-attrition Cloud of Darkness. After a long fucking fight, I finally did a gorillion damage and defeated Cloud of Darkness, saving the world. We get this brief text scroll kinda talking about the world building at large with regards to the light and the dark and the void between. When we come back, we are greeted by the 5 hearts of light, and we all leave together. As much as story is not the game's strong suit, it was extremely heartwarming to watch your party fly back through the world and drop all of your companions off back at their homes. Especially in the case of Desh and Sid, as they go back home to Canaan. Sid returns to his lovely wife, and Desh returns to the girl he somewhat unintentionally curved way back at the beginning. Speaking of romance, Princess Sarah wants to come back to your hometown because she's had the hots for you. Like, one of you, I guess, since the tutorial act. You both return home to are given the hero's welcome, and look up to see the warmth of the light bathe over the world, return to peace and tranquility. Credits roll on the final game in the series on the NES. Let the record know that the highest leveled member of my party was Hammy, with a level 90 bard. I think Final Fantasy III is good, but I'm not willing to give it anything higher than that. This may be a matter of taste, but like 80% of this game washed over me. I won't say it was easy, but I didn't feel as engaged as I would have liked. It isn't until Cave of Shadows that I felt like the game got out of first gear mechanically, and that's like 3rd or 4th dungeon from the end. Mainly this is due to there being so many locations and destinations that funnel towards small, nondescript combat dungeons. Rarely did they feel like challenges I had to think about, and instead of just kind of stomped my way through. Albeit I do think that there is a modernization at play that creates that feeling. There are so many secret paths, and the Pixel Remaster makes them more noticeable and easier to navigate, whereas I can see how the original experience could have been designed around more simplistic and linear dungeons that you are scouring every corner of to find the secrets. The times that these dungeons felt different were in ways that used the job system in a somewhat ungraceful way. I've beaten the point home, but mini dungeons, frog dungeons, the Hien or Garuda boss fights, Dark Knight dungeons, etc. feel more like puzzles than strategy. The encounter design itself really isn't strong enough to make you strategize how you are going to use the job system as much as you are using the job system to find the capital A answer. This feels especially true in the bosses I ran into that are just one-spell Johnnies. These fights don't feel difficult because they are engaging, they feel difficult because it's wave after wave of the same powerful spell, and you either race it or you can't. The job system still rips, but it feels like a foundational idea moving forward instead of the main course right here, right now. The best parts of the game were after the water crystal, when the job system really opened up in interesting ways, and I felt like I was allowed to approach the game with whatever goofy synergy I could craft. Maybe the more blah encounter design is to help facilitate players being able to go fucking buck wild creating a team that they can take as far as they can. I would update my team with further advanced jobs as they unlocked, but I am probably on the short list of people who took a fucking bard into the endgame. But speaking of jobs, it does feel like the first time Final Fantasy has created something original for itself. FF1 is still very reliant on Dungeons and Dragons. FF2, at least story-wise, is borrowing heavily from Star Wars. It's critical to point out that FF3 is aping from Dragon Quest III, but what it does with that idea feels fresh and exciting. Really unique classes like Scholar, Evoker, Dragoon, Viking, Geomancer, and so forth bring this feeling that Final Fantasy is on the cutting edge of something new. These are cool ideas being played with, and taking Final Fantasy out of its swords and spells trappings is going to be one of the cores that moves this series forward throughout time. But if there's one place this game falls down for me, it's the story. It's not like I need a page-turner storyline to keep me going, but in contrast to FF2, you can see how much worse FF3 is at pacing out a plot. At the macro level, you are collecting the crystals to save the world from plunging into darkness, but so much of the game is spent never seeing this threat emerge or who is behind it. You are told about the threat, and there's some great world building and learning about the balance of light and dark that goes on, but you don't actually see the villain of the story until it's time to defeat him, nor do you see his impact on the world other than people saying, yada yada, darkness coming, weather at 11. It's a lot of little bespoke stories that aren't very long or fleshed out and hold little to no bearing on the plot of the world. This, combined with the ho-hum dungeoning, kinda made me enjoy FF3 less. There's so much good being explored here, but it doesn't feel like it finds its potential in this game and will find it in later releases. However, there's still one thing I can offer up as a home run. Final Fantasy III is funny. There's so many lighthearted and comedic moments that help keep the constant town-to-town exploration entertaining. If I'm being honest, one of my main motivators from maybe the halfway point onward was wrapping up this game and this video so I could start Final Fantasy IV, because at this point I was frothing at the mouth to get my hands on what many consider the first real Final Fantasy. I may be dumping on it, but Final Fantasy III is still good and worth playing. It will go down the easiest of the NES FF games, but I gotta keep it hot. I think I liked 2 more. Which is fucking crazy speak to hear me say, but I think it's true. But with the end of Final Fantasy's first era, let's wave goodbye to the first steps in one of gaming's biggest series. Ending the NES era of Final Fantasy gives you so much perspective on where the series will go from here. It feels disingenuous to say that Final Fantasy doesn't feel like Final Fantasy just yet, but that's probably the best way I can describe it. Each of the first 3 games help contribute a base that is going to springboard Final Fantasy into the stratosphere. FF1 is the structure, FF2 is the story and experimentation, FF3 is the wide possibility space of jobs. Over these 3 games, you can still feel some growing pains compared to where the series will go, but each entry offers something that makes that worth experiencing. I started this series to play each Final Fantasy game in order, but I didn't really think about what that method would entail until I got to here. By playing them in order, I'm going to watch this series grow and evolve, iterate on itself, and be able to see what each game takes from those before it. The NES era was fun, but I wasn't doing backflips while playing it. Now that I'm on the other side though, knowing that I'm about to enter the 16-bit era of Square, I feel like a rabid dog. All of the struggle these first 3 games can bring only makes my heart race faster when I think about what I get to play next. As I write this, I desire to ditch every other project I have on this channel. I'm about to start playing the games that people fall in love with, that people tattoo on their body, the games that make people want to name their fucking kids after. The burning feeling of knowing that I am done with the halcyon days of Final Fantasy, that the next time I pick up a game in this series, the storm will be here and it will not leave until it blows away all that is in its path. I kinda left this thread unresolved early in the video, but Final Fantasy III was the last game Nasir did for the series. He took an extended vacation after the release of that game, only to come back for his final game he ever programmed, Secret of Mana. Holy fuck, this guy cannot miss! He would retire after its release in 1993 and live off of what is no doubt an insane amount of royalty checks for his hand in the first 3 Final Fantasy games. We should also touch on the Mana series very briefly, as it's about to tie into Final Fantasy in big ways. After Final Fantasy III, Square offered designer Koichi Ishii the opportunity to direct a Final Fantasy spin-off for the Game Boy. Unlike Saga, which was a separate series that tied into Final Fantasy for stateside releases, Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden was a Final Fantasy spin-off first that served as the initial entry in the Seiken Densetsu or Mana series. Released in 1991, this game would be the first to feature a very important figure in the history of both Square and Final Fantasy, Yoshinori Kitase. While it might be a while before we really get familiar with Kitase, it's important to note his introduction in the series. Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden, or Final Fantasy Adventure if you're American, or Mystic Quest if you're in PAL region, was a success, and much like Akitoshi Kawazu with Saga, Koichi Ishii exited the Final Fantasy series to work on the new Mana series. He wouldn't be alone in leaving after Final Fantasy III, as this game would also mark the exit of FF3 designer Hiromichi Tanaka. Not to get too far into the next episode, but during the development of Final Fantasy IV, Tanaka wanted something more action-based. He would change development teams to instead go work on Seiken Densetsu 2, aka Secret of Mana. Next episode, we will talk about who stepped in to fill his spot. And with that, we prepare to enter one of the most legendary eras in gaming. Final Fantasy III released in April of 1990, and in November of that year, the Super Famicom would release in Japan. While the Super Nintendo is beloved by many a gamer my age, this 16-bit time frame would be a hotbed for the JRPG genre. Square would be one of the companies leading the charge, releasing a slew of titles that would define this generation, and a handful of which, to this day, are still in contention for the greatest JRPGs ever made. So next time, we look at Square's opening shot into this historic rise in gaming, as the world is introduced to Final Fantasy IV.